I'm travelling through the British Isles to places that have inspired some of our greatest artists. The white cliffs of the south coast, a symbol of Britain's defiance. Beyond the wall of chalk, a softer landscape. Kent, the garden of England. Sweet-smelling hops, orchards, and hidden villages. Brighton, birthplace of seaside holidays and illicit weekends. And the South Downs, the hills which roll like waves of the sea along the coast. For over 2,000 years, enemies of Britain have looked on the southeast corner of these islands with greedy eyes, seeing them as the perfect place for invasion. In 55 BC, it was Julius Caesar who landed down the coast. 1066, and William the Conqueror for the Normans. And then in 1940, the last great battle for Britain was fought in the skies above our heads. No picture of Britain would be complete without the sea. I begin the journey aboard my own boat, sailing in the English Channel. This is the first time Rocket's been up in these waters. She normally lives in the West Country. She was designed in Falmouth for dredging for oysters in the winter, racing in the summer. But her hull and her rig are typical of thousands of boats that would have sailed at the end of the 19th century. Fast, seaworthy, as they have to be for the treacherous waters round the coasts of Britain. William Shakespeare defined our island as this fortress, built by nature for herself against infection and the hand of war. This precious stone set in a silver sea. For over 1,000 years, the English Channel has been the moat which protected us from invasion. Dutch frigate going past. She'd have been sunk, of course, several hundred years ago if she dared come into these waters, but they're good allies now. I'm sailing past the Needles, at the mouth of the Solent between the Isle of Wight and the mainland. These jagged rocks caught the eye of the artist William Turner when he was only 21 years old. It was the start of a lifelong passion for the sea. Nearly a third of all Turner's canvases are seascapes. He painted the sea in all its moods. At one moment, placid, allowing itself to be harnessed by man. At another, violent and threatening. Turner had a new idea of what painting was for. He wanted to capture the raw power of the elements. He said that he once had himself tied to the mast of a ship in a violent storm, and he stayed there watching the wind whipping the spray off the waves, admitting afterwards he hadn't expected to survive. In The Shipwreck, Turner explores man's vain struggle against the forces of nature. But this seascape was also seen as a political comment on the state of the nation. When he painted it in 1805, the French under Napoleon were preparing to invade Britain. The shipwreck symbolized our island in peril. By 1815, Britain had triumphed over Napoleon, and the sea, once a battlefield, became a playground. Today, the only guns that fire from the battlements of Cowes Castle on the Isle of Wight are the starting cannon for yacht races. Cowes Week, the main sailing event of the year, was founded in 1826. A year later, Turner arrived to capture the sea in a more playful mood. We're approaching Portsmouth now, once the greatest naval port in the world, defender of Britain, defender of her far-flung empire. When Britannia ruled the waves, this was her throne.
In the early 19th century, the Royal Navy boasted 500 ships. They were called the Wooden Walls of England. The pride of the fleet is still here today. Lord Nelson's flagship, HMS Victory. I'm heading east along the coast from Portsmouth to cross from Hampshire into Sussex. First stop, the seaside town of Bognor Regis.
Some people are rather snobbish about this south coast, as it is now. I mean, a place like Bognor. It is a bit bleak, I suppose. I like bleak. Anyway, what do you expect? This is the English Channel, not the south of France or southern Spain. George V was the cause of all the trouble there, because on his deathbed he was told by his doctor, trying to cheer him up, "It's all right, Your Majesty, you'll soon be fit to go to Bognor." And he replied, "Bugger Bognor," and died.
"200 years ago, this part of Sussex offered sanctuary to one of our most original painters and poets, William Blake.
William Blake only left London once in his life. He came to live in the little village of Felpham. "Away to sweet Felpham," he wrote, "for heaven is there." Not on a morning like this, it isn't.
Blake didn't see the world as others saw it. His landscape was alive with visions. He saw heavenly bodies in his garden, souls over the cornfields, angels floating along the shore. When he looked out to sea, he saw God moving across the water. As for his homely little cottage, to Blake, who made this tiny etching of it, it was the dwelling of the immortals.
I can imagine how convenient this was for Blake with his front door there, and this was his workroom.
There he is.
Yes,
thank goodness.
That is a life mask.
He looks like a death mask. He had visions.
Yes. I totally believe that is not a problem to me. I have known other, and it's not...
Well, you've had visions here too? Or?
I haven't, but I've known people, and I won't mention names, who have, and they're not like spirits or a feeling. They actually see a solid figure, as close as I'm seeing you now, as solid as that.
So this is the bedroom?
Well, I was never sure, but I had a strange clairvoyant couple here who, I think they were Dutch, and the woman had a sort of amulet thing that she was holding, and it never moved all through the... And I didn't tell her what I saw, but when she came in here, it was swinging like mad, and she burst into tears and said, "Oh, I could feel him here."
My mother said something very odd the other day about feeling, when she was in a cottage in the country in the war, feeling a sort of hand passing over her hair. I couldn't believe it. And she's a very rational...
Yes.
Very rational woman.
Well, all the more reason to believe her.
Yes.
Yes.
But you've never felt him here?
That's a difficult one to say. I feel the tranquility. He was happy here for a time, until they got all the illness. And I've never felt spooky about the cottage, ever.
Because the view is not quite what it was, I suspect.
Can you imagine how wonderful...
A block of flats.
Oh, terrible.
And seaside villas. But when Blake was here, this would have been his view of the sea. And there would have been what in front?
I wish it was cornfields.
Cornfields.
Nothing but cornfields.
Yes, no, it must have been magical.
Wonderful.
William Blake believed his visions heralded a better world to come, where hatred and war would be at an end. His most famous poem is now a national hymn. Jerusalem imagines England as the promised land.
Da da dee, dum da 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 dee. Out of tune. Up here on the crest of the Downs, you feel you're almost on top of the world. And to Blake, who'd lived all his life in the squalor and stench of the streets of 18th century London, it must really have seemed like paradise on earth. It still does, really.
The greenness of the downs and the angle of the hills always seems somehow gentle, and it seems a very welcoming place. When you get up to the starkness of some of the Scotland and some of the bleakness of the hills, and so I like this part, I do really. I've sort of grown up with it, and I really like living here.
People come from the big cities, don't they, just to spend a day?
Oh, they do.
Yeah. What is it about it?
Well, it's just the quietness, isn't it, really? Here, this is, I think, a very privileged spot. We can't hear a road, and there's not many places in the country when you think about that. You know, people want to, I think, be silent sometimes. We don't need noise all the time. Sometimes we just want to think and pause and realise who we are.
By the end of the 18th century, a little Sussex fishing village had been transformed into London's playground, Brighton.
Oh. Can you give me a pot of a bit of cockle, a bit of whelk, and a bit of shrimp? It looks delicious. Cockles. Mmm. These bowls of fruit. Sweetheart, I love you. The all-day breakfast, bacon, eggs, sausage, and orange baked beans. A must for every household. I've always longed to have a tattoo. I don't know why, it's a terrible idea, of my star sign. I can either have a Scorpio or I can have the word Sharon and a heart, but I think I go for the scorpion, except it's not open. Pity. The tourists may have flocked here, but the artists were told it wasn't really worth the journey. This guidebook, written in 1774, for them says, it's a disagreeable place, adorned with no rocky shore, no winding coast, nor any other pleasing accompaniment. Dead straight, boring. Painters, go home.
One painter did come here, and one of England's finest, John Constable. It wasn't the views, but the sea air he wanted, for his sick wife, Maria, who was suffering from consumption. He too was dismayed by the landscape and by the crowds. In a letter to a friend, he said Brighton was Piccadilly by the sea. There's nothing here for a painter but the breakers and the sky. But undaunted, Constable painted what he saw. Local fishermen and their boats in the foreground, the new Brighton consigned to the far distance. And much of the picture given over to those breakers and the sky. But if Constable disliked Brighton in the 1820s, just a few years later he would have hated it even more. In 1841, the London to Brighton Railway opened. A 7-hour journey by stagecoach was now just an hour and a half by train, and the fares were cheap. The day tripper invaded Brighton.
There was growing panic among the wealthy classes who came to Brighton that they were going to be swamped by the vulgar mob from the city. The writer William Thackeray, for instance, came down here and described all the rich and famous friends that he'd met, and then complained bitterly that he'd actually met his tailor and his wife. And he said he was sickened by the sight of them. You see, what was happening on the beaches was a new battle, a kind of class warfare being fought. And the glue that held the social hierarchy of Victorian Britain together was coming unstuck.
But the painter William Frith revelled in the social chaos of the seaside. After a trip to Ramsgate in 1851, he started painting landscapes swarming with people. When Frith's Grand Panorama was exhibited, it caused a sensation with the public, though one critic wondered how anybody could waste their time painting such a tissue of vulgarity. But Queen Victoria stamped his work with her seal of approval. She bought this painting for a tidy sum, over £1,000.
Arundel Castle's been painted by scores of artists down the years. Two of the best are great landscape painters, Turner and Constable. And they took these massive battlements, this symbol of man's aggression, and had it swallowed up by nature. Almost as though it counted for nothing against the great forces of the landscape.
When Turner came here in 1824, he painted the downs tumbling into the valley, and almost as an afterthought, the castle, perched high on its hill.
Constable came to Arundel 10 years after Turner, but he came in despair. He'd been suffering from terrible depression. He had rheumatism. He said himself he couldn't concentrate or complete anything. And coming here lifted his spirits, gave him that surge of energy, of confidence that allowed him to take up his painting again.
Constable said, "I never saw such beauty in a natural landscape." Surprising praise from the man whose first love was the flatlands of Suffolk.
Constable's health continued to fail, but he was determined to paint this view in time for the summer exhibition at the Royal Academy. "I'm at work on a beautiful subject," he said. "It shall be my best painting."
Constable painted Arundel Castle in harmony with nature. A mill dominates the foreground, and children fish in the stream. It's a vision of a castle built for war, but tamed by peace. Constable had 6 weeks to meet his deadline for the exhibition. He only just made it, and a few weeks later, John Constable was dead. When the weather changes, the South Downs are transformed into a place of drama. Chanctonbury Ring, an ancient hill fort crowned with a circle of beech trees.
The great English composer John Ireland fell in love with this place. He spent his final years living in a mill just over the hill. He loved it for its serene beauty, its calm, but he also detected something different, a sort of darkness that sprang from the history of this place.
John Ireland rarely worked at the piano, preferring to compose as he walked. On these hills, he created one of his most haunting works. Chanctonbury Ring is steeped in myth and folklore. According to legend, it's haunted by Julius Caesar and his army, but you only see them if you correctly count the number of trees. But it gets spookier still.
It's said that if you walk round Chanctonbury Ring backwards 7 times, the devil will come out of the trees and offer you a bowl of porridge. And if you accept it, he'll take your soul.
This is bonfire season. I've come to Lewes in East Sussex to see the biggest bonfire celebration of them all. The origin of Lewes Bonfire Night is not just Guy Fawkes and his plot to blow up the Houses of Parliament. It goes back further to the clash between Catholic and Protestant in Tudor times. The burning of 17 Protestant martyrs in Lewes High Street in the 1550s made Lewes the scene of Britain's most extravagant bonfire rituals, with 17 burning crosses for the 17 martyrs.
You know, for over 200 years this has been going on. Anti-popery, burning the Pope, Guy Fawkes and all the rest of it. The authorities time and again have tried to stop it happening, either because of its bigotry or because of the violence there used to be in the streets. Every time they try and stop it, the people of Lewes say, no, the streets are ours tonight, you keep out of the way.
Thomas Henwood's picture of 1853 shows the people of Lewes in full cry, marching down the High Street. A few miles away from Lewes is the village of Rottingdean. This is where the poet Rudyard Kipling first lived when he set up home in England in 1897. After spending much of his life in India, he began to explore Sussex, using a newfangled and still distrusted invention.
From the moment Kipling set foot in a car, he was hooked. He said the poison worked from that very hour. He became an enthusiast, a pioneer in uncharted territories, he saw it. He said that this was the most marvelous of all the foreign lands he'd been in. It's not at all like driving in a modern car, is it? It's a wonderful view.
Well, there's no obstruction, of course. You've got no screen, no hood, no nothing. So, yes, the view, and you're nice and high up. You can see over the top of most people.
Think what Kipling, who'd only travelled on a horse or in a horse and cart, must have felt when he got this freedom.
Must have been absolutely wonderful.
Each to his choice, and I rejoice the lot has fallen to me in a fair ground, yea, Sussex by the sea. Clean of officious fence or hedge, half wild and wholly tame, the wise turf cloaks the white cliff edge, as when the Romans came. Here leaps ashore the full sou'west, all heavy-winged with brine. Here lies, above the folded crest, the Channel's leaden line.
Kipling called his motor car a time machine in which he could slide from one century to another, like watching layer upon layer of the history of this country. He said it was a museum in which all the exhibits had become alive and real. His thoughts turned to all the people who'd ruled this land, the Saxons, the Vikings, the Normans, and then to the future threat our nation faced.
In 1903, Kipling wrote a chilling prophecy, a vision of disaster descending from the skies. Kipling wrote, "That winged men the fates may breed so soon as fate hath wings, these shall possess our littleness." On May the 25th, 1917, a fleet of 21 German bombers appeared over the southeast of England. It was one of their first bombing raids. In Folkestone, nearly 100 people were killed. Kipling's prophecy was becoming reality. Flying offered a new perspective to artists. Christopher Nevinson was the first to capture the British landscape from an aeroplane. Nevinson said he felt very lonely up in the heavens, but added that he was thrilled by the whole newness of vision and the excitement of it all. In his picture, Banking at 4,000 feet, he was in the rear cockpit, his hand grasping the side of the plane. Nevinson saw the landscape of the southeast as no artist had ever seen it before. The patchwork of English fields stretching to the horizon.
Faster! Ruby, come here. Come on. Jack! Jack, come on then. Come on then. Come on. Come on then. Come on. Good girl. That's it. Oh, oh, oh. Good girl. Good boy. Come on then. Come on we go. Come on.
The eastern reaches of the Downs. This is the part I know best.
I love it up here on the Downs. This is my favourite place to walk. It's quite near my home. I come here, well, whenever I can, really. It doesn't matter what the weather is, whether it's like today, a bit blustery, or whether it's hot sun, or whether it's a gale blowing. The thing that I like about it most, really, I think, is the way the land lies. There are places where you feel almost that you're on the sea, because the roll of these downs and the sweep of them, and it changes with the light. On a sunny day sometimes, the whole shape of a hillside will change. It's not a static countryside, it's always on the move. You always get the feeling that things have happened here and things are happening here, and as you walk, you swoop along down and up and down and up. Your soul just sort of lifts when you're up here. It's just heaven, if you believe in heaven.
The artist Eric Ravilius died young in the Second World War, but not before he'd captured the changing beauty of his home county. Ravilius was intrigued by the giant chalk figure known as the Long Man of Wilmington.
Ravilius, like lots of people around here, believed that this great guardian of the Downs was prehistoric. Nobody really knows the truth of that. Archaeologists have tried to discover it and can't. Some say it's Middle Ages, some say from the 17th or the 18th centuries. Is it a figure opening the doors to heaven? Or is it a giant on sticks coming down the hill? What's the point of it? It's fascinating. Everybody has their own view.
Ravilius's picture of Beachy Head was painted on the eve of war, brooding clouds and shadowy downland. The beam of the lighthouse piercing a world of gathering darkness. In 1942, this poster, with its shepherd nudging his sheep back home, was issued to the armed forces by the War Office to keep up morale. It was part of a series designed by the artist Frank Newbold. He chose rural Sussex to capture the essence of Britain. Though our islands boast 100 different landscapes, it was this place that was chosen to rouse our patriotic fervour. I'm crossing the border between Sussex and Kent. This is the countryside that Charles Dickens wrote about in his first novel, Pickwick Papers. Mr. Pickwick and his friends are accosted by a stranger who boasts to them about his female conquests in Spain. And they ask him, are there fine women in Kent? And he says, splendid, capital. Everyone knows Kent, sir. Apples, cherries, hops, and women. I have this picture now of Kentish girls, very rosy cheeked like the apples. I don't know whether it's true. Seen through the eyes of artists, it's no wonder that Kent's called the Garden of England. Samuel Palmer had a vision of this corner of Kent as a kind of heaven. The fields of corn, a sea of gold, the people working in them all saints, a place of innocence and abundance and peace, as though the devil had not yet found it, he wrote. Another painter tried to capture Kent's beauty, but in a quite different style. For Helen Allingham, what mattered wasn't mystical visions, but comforting images. Thatched cottages with roses round the door. Allingham was very popular towards the end of the Victorian era. Her cosy pictures found on everything, from postcards and calendars to biscuit boxes. Kent was also the inspiration for one of our most famous amateur painters. Winston Churchill approached the task in a typically robust style. He wrote, "Painting a picture is like fighting a battle. Thorough reconnaissance of the country where the battle is to be fought is needed. Its fields, its rivers, its bridges, its trees, all require attentive observation. One is quite astonished to find how many things there are in the landscape." And I had lived for over 40 years without ever noticing any of them. Churchill's love for the country meant he was at his happiest at home here at Chartwell. Like thousands of amateur painters, he found this landscape an irresistible challenge. From the terrace, you look right out over the Weald of Kent. Soft, gentle countryside, villages, woods, no towns or cities or smoke. It's no wonder that at the most difficult times in his life, Churchill's thoughts would always come back here. Since the First World War, Churchill had suffered from periodic depression, not least because his political career seemed doomed. Black Dog, he called it, and it overwhelmed him with despair. Churchill wrote, "It was then the muse of painting came to my rescue and said, Are these toys any good to you? They amuse some people.
Two things happened in my father's life that really kennelled Black Dog, I think. One was marrying my mother, and the second was painting. When he picked up the paintbrush, it was as if he'd picked up a magic wand, and painting was with him for the rest of his life.
And what do you think it was that it did for him? Why was he so keen on it?
I think that he found this world of colour and shade and light and scenery. He loved the open air, and I think it completely took him out of the clatter of politics.
And he painted here, of course, didn't he? This view behind us.
That is the view that captivated him. You know, the first time he came to Chartwell, he walked out onto the terrace and he saw that view. And he fell in love with it then and there. To him, it was an enchanted valley. And I think that the fact that he had this hobby and occupation, the pressures of political life, really, for the time he was doing it, really fell away. I think it may have been key to him really being able to stand the heat and burden of the day when it came to the war.
Churchill painted this view of Chartwell and the Weald of Kent in the autumn of 1938, 12 months before Britain declared war on Germany.
It's perhaps not fanciful to think that, as he sat here painting, Churchill also brooded on what lay ahead. He knew war was inevitable, and this landscape may have represented for him everything that would be lost if Britain failed to rise to the challenge.
In 1940, this Garden of England was transformed into Hellfire Corner. The Battle of Britain was fought in the skies above Chartwell. The painter Paul Nash was commissioned as a war artist in the Air Ministry. Nash saw the Battle of Britain as a fight to the death. He called the planes aerial creatures. He showed their duels, traced by vapor trails against the blue of an English summer sky.
You come into vapor trails just suddenly. 1 minute you're there, next minute you're making trails, and the whole squadron's making trails. And sometimes they gave you away, of course. If you wish to conceal those trails, you could just drop down 50 feet and you're in the clear.
When you were up there, did you ever have a feeling that this is like a sort of aerial ballet, or were you too busy
No.
not being shot down and shooting down?
I think you got it, you hit it there. 1 minute everything's going quite normally and hopefully and you're in battle formation. And then suddenly there's a lookout and you're there amongst you. If you saw bullets coming over your starboard wing, the tendency is to turn away. That's the worst thing you could do. You must turn into the fire. If you turn away, he's immediately on your tail. He's right behind you and you're a dead man. But if you turn into it, then he can't possibly get you. He's got to pull his nose around here to hit you. He can fire at you, but he won't hit you. And then, of course, you just respond. It's, I suppose, like riding a horse, really. You are one with the aeroplane. And you don't think what you're going to, you actually do it. You go up and you go down and you push open your throttle and you close it and you push the aeroplane around. It's part of you.
Paul Nash wrote in a letter, "I've never before had such a stimulating adventure as an artist. Yet all this time, I've not once flown in an aeroplane. I wish I was able to fly and explore the mysterious domain of the air."
Nash's great ambition of flying could never be realized. A gas attack in the trenches in the First World War had left him with chronic asthma, and if he ever took to the skies as he longed to, it could be fatal.
But Nash would turn his disappointment into inspiration for some of his best work. With his dreams of flying dashed, Nash sought out the wreckage of aircraft to paint. He painted an extraordinary series of landscapes with German planes shot down from the sky, plucked from their element, shattered in woodlands, mangled in cornfields, stranded on beaches, and smashed beneath the white cliffs of the south coast. The series culminated in one of the strangest paintings to come out of the Second World War. The wreckage of hundreds of German planes, wings and wheels all jumbled up, like a seascape seen by moonlight. A lone white owl flies low in the sky across the mangled metal waves. He called it Totes Meer, German for Dead Sea.
But Nash's art isn't at all what his bosses at the Air Ministry were looking for. They wanted heroic pictures of young airmen standing by their gleaming aircraft. And so in the end, they sacked him, or as Nash put it, bailed me out at 2,000 feet.
There's one voice that captured the mood of those times, lifting the spirits of British airmen, soldiers and sailors far from home. And as ever, using the image of Britain as a fortress.
There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover. Tomorrow, just you wait and see.
Did the White Cliffs mean something to you because you'd been here and seen them and felt strongly about them?
No, I'd never seen them, but I knew what they meant to people. And in my own mind, I could picture what they meant, and the boys sailing away and looking and saying, well, that's England, that's home, and I hope to see it again.
There'll be bluebirds over
It was just perfect. It was something that stayed in their mind, you know. I mean, the people that were at home, the sweethearts and the wives, knew that so many of their sons and husbands were leaving from the shore. And for the boys themselves, it was something of home. I mean, it was a symbol that this is where they came from. Something that is forever England. It was hoping for better days and happier times, and that's what the bluebird stands for. Something that flew in the air, you know, and like our aeroplanes.
In his own little room again.
I can't sit here by the cliffs with you without asking you to sing a verse.
Oh, I don't sing anymore. I've retired from singing.
Even the chorus?
No. No. Well, I just think, there'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover tomorrow, just you wait and see. See, that was the optimistic thing. Everything will be lovely, everything will be back to normal. Not quite, but the bluebirds are still there.
There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover tomorrow, just you